I've said it before, and I'll say it again. Democracy simply doesn't work.
Hordes of panicky people seem to be evacuating the town for some unknown reason. Professor, without knowing precisely what the danger is, would you say it's time for our viewers to crack each other's heads open and feast on the goo inside? Yes, I would, Kent.
Sir, may I ask you a question?
What's on your mind, Lieutenant?
The Kobayashi Maru, sir.
Are you asking me if we're playing out that scenario now?
On the test, sir. Will you tell me what you did? I would really like to know.
Lieutenant, you are looking at the only Starfleet cadet who ever beat the no-win scenario.
How?
I reprogrammed the simulation so it was possible to rescue the ship.
What?
He cheated.
I changed the conditions of the test. Got a commendation for original thinking. I don't like to lose.
Then you never faced that situation. Faced death.
I don't believe in the no-win scenario. Kirk to Spock. It's 2 hours. Are you ready?
Right on schedule, Admiral. Just give us your coordinates and we'll beam you aboard.
All right. I don't like to lose.
Whatever comes out of these gates, we've got a better chance of survival if we work together. Do you understand? If we stay together, we survive.
Pleased to bring you!
Hey, poor! Hey, poor! Hey, poor! You don't have to be poor anymore! Jesus is here!
The loudspeaker spoke up and said, Christianity is stupid.
Greetings, fellow worker slaves, podcasting at 128 kilobits from the Fortress of Squalitude near the Redneck Mecca. This is the Atheist in the Trailer Park podcast. I'm your host, Tucker. Professor Fuzznutz has just woken up from his nap and is debating about joining us. Yes, it's a podcast hosted by a guy and his cat. Get over it. And I don't need to tell you who won the election and who lost. Like a lot of people, I tuned in to watch the Cog Disc guys cover the election. I was sure it was going to be a blast, right up until the moment they called Florida for Trump. At that point, I knew we were pretty much fucked. I drank an entire fifth of scotch while watching more and more states go for the Republican camp before crawling into bed at 1:30 in the morning, trying not to shit my pants. That might be the reason why the next day at work, I got my hand caught in a press and broke my thumb. Bear with me, there is a point to this. As soon as the machine caught my hand, I knew there was a problem. And I was lucky enough to be close enough to the cutoff switch that I could reach for it with my free hand and shut off the press. I then tried to pull my hand free. I couldn't. I quickly looked around to see if I could spot the guy who's been training me on how to operate the press, but he was nowhere to be found. At which point, I looked for anyone, to go get help. I managed to get the attention of one woman near me and urgently said for her to get help because my hand was caught. She started screaming at people. The guy at the press next to mine ran over and hit the jog button, which also doubles as the cutoff switch. "What did you do that for?" I yelled at him. "I was turning off the press," he said. "It was already off," I snapped. Another guy came over and tried to pull apart the rollers which had caught my hand. It almost worked. Randall, who's one of the supervisors, came over, saw what had happened, looked me in the eye, and said, "Don't panic. We're going to get you out." I instantly felt better because his was the reaction I wanted to see from anyone at that point. I wasn't in a lot of pain, and I knew that the last thing I needed was for people to be trying anything and everything to get me out. I was sure that there had to be a fairly simple way to get me free. Randall then turned to someone, I couldn't see who, and told them to cut the power to the press. This way we wouldn't have to worry about it coming back on. They cut the power to the press. Randall stepped to the back of the machine, looked me in the eye, and said very methodically, "Tucker, I'm going to try something. We'll get you free. Don't worry." I looked Randall back in the eye and said, "You're going to try to turn it backwards manually to get my hand out." "Yes," he said, again very methodically. "I'm not sure which way it's going to go when I turn it, so I'm going to try turning it slightly, and you tell me if it's the right way or not." I watched the roller move in the correct direction and said, "That's it, you've got it." He did a quick turn in the same direction and my hand popped out. They stared at my hand, saw that my thumb looked pretty fucked up, and took me to the ER. Had Randall not been so calm and focused while he was working to get my hand free, I would have had a hard time dealing with the pain caused by it being caught between the rollers. Because he was so calm, I didn't have to think about telling people what to do or what not to do. I could just concentrate on what I needed to do and blocking the pain out of my head. Right now, nearly everybody with any sense is panicking over Trump's election. I'm going to try to be one of the calm voices in the wake of this disaster. There's nothing wrong with panicking or being angry or afraid. But if we're to move forward, then we have to clamp down on our emotions and use our reasoning ability. If we allow ourselves, as Trump supporters do, to be driven by blind emotion, a lot of us are going to end up dead. First things first, we on the left have to stop blaming people who voted for third-party candidates, because that's like getting stung by a bee and blaming it on flowers. The truth is, everyone in this country shares the blame for Trump being elected. That might sound hard to believe, but listen to me for a moment. In a rational country, no party that picked someone like Trump to be their nominee to be president would be one of the largest parties in that country. But they are. In a rational country, the news media wouldn't have given Trump such fawning attention, and he got more free airtime than any other candidate, Republican or Democratic, during the primaries, and then acted surprised when he won the nomination. But they did. In a rational country, tens of millions of people wouldn't decide to not exercise their right to vote in any election, especially not one so important. But they did. Until we recognize that our country, and really all countries, are bat-shit insane, we're not going to make much progress. In a society that considered voting to be a legal obligation of citizenship, we wouldn't have a government which systematically blocks large members of the population from voting. In Wisconsin alone, 300,000 people were turned away from the polls thanks to the new restrictive voting laws Governor Walker put in place. Potentially, those voters would have been enough to flip the state for Hillary. We've no idea who they would have voted for, but she lost the state by 27,000 votes. So if only half of those people had voted for her, she still could have won Wisconsin. Secondly, we have to offer unconditional support to the most vulnerable among us. There's been a spike in media reports about attacks on minorities and others. Regardless of how accurate these reports are, we know that the Republicans are going to go after the legal protections put in place for minorities during the Obama administration. These people need to be protected. I'll have a link in the show notes to a list of organizations that you can donate to if you so desire. Groups like Planned Parenthood, the Freedom from Religion Foundation, Lambda Legal, and others are going to be needing money to fight laws which hurt minorities, and they're going to have to do it in a legal system that's heavily Republican-controlled. Also, things like food banks, homeless shelters, and places that provide help for the uninsured and mentally ill are going to need assistance. And don't forget science-based groups like the Planetary Society as well. The sciences are probably going to have their funding cut pretty harshly since Trump doesn't give any thought towards science. Hell, even your local science museum is probably going to be needing cash in the wake of this election. I'll also have a link to a listing of science-based organizations who could use your help in the wake of this disaster in the show notes. Third, we need to change how we frame our messages if we want to stop Trump as quickly as we can. Call Trump anything you want when you're talking with someone who shares your views. But, and this is key, anytime you're talking with someone who's a Trump supporter, always refer to Trump as President Trump or Mr. Trump. I know it's probably unpalatable, but here's why. If someone was talking to you about Obama, and they referred to him as the novelty president, or any of a number of derogatory terms, you'd immediately write off what they had to say about Obama, and the discussion would quickly devolve into hurling insults at one another. You want to keep the discussion focused on the issues, on showing what Trump does and how it's harming everyone. Also, if someone hand waves away a point you're making, don't continue hammering away at that same point. Shift your focus to another area. Many of the people who voted for Trump did so not because they agreed with what he had to say, if they even knew about it, but because he wasn't Hillary. They're not going to care that he broke a campaign promise. They probably don't even know what his campaign promises were. Instead, listen to why they support Trump and try to show how what he's doing goes against that. They may not believe you, or they may not care now, but it can help to sow the seeds of doubt in their minds. Additionally, it might help them to understand that even if you disagree with them, you're not a bad person. Remember, there's no difference in politics and religion in the minds of most people. Their party and their God are right, and anyone who disagrees with them on that is a vile human being worthy of scorn. An attack on either their politics or their religion is seen as an attack on who they are. Shift the discussion so that you're seen as being on the same side as them, even though you disagree with them on a given matter. That sounds difficult, and it can be, but it can be done. You just have to remain calm and ignore any insults aimed at you. I'll give you an example of how to do this. Back when the Obamacare debate was going on, one guy I knew was railing about the benefits cap in the law. He was absolutely certain that this was an evil Obama plot to deprive him of insurance. I asked him if he'd bothered to read the details on his current insurance policy, because if he had, he'd know that the policy had a cap as well. That didn't change his opinion about Obamacare, but it wiped out one of his objections to it, so I consider it a win. In the years since, he's come to accept that Obamacare isn't a bad thing, even if he disagrees with parts of it. The odds of anyone flipping their religious or political beliefs based on a single discussion are nil. You can, however, nudge people in the right direction. If I had called him a fascist or moron for not liking Obamacare, I wouldn't have gotten anywhere with him. But because I pointed out to him that his own health insurance policy had the same kinds of limitations, without calling him an idiot for not knowing that, I got him to admit that Obamacare wasn't as bad as he originally thought. We're not going to reach everybody, of course, but we don't have to. We just need enough people to mitigate the damage which is being done. The successes humanity has had to this point in time can all be traced to science and reason. It wasn't prayer that wiped out smallpox, it was science. It wasn't prayer that ended Jim Crow, it was reason. We will win this. We have to. If we focus on science and reason to guide us, and don't get bogged down in emotional arguments, we will win. Emotions have their place, but we have to remember to not allow them to dictate our actions when they could do us the most harm by letting them gain control. Educate people. Don't insult them. And we will win this. We have to. The survival of our species depends upon it. Also remember, this is the 21st century, and thanks to the internet, you have an ocean of information at your fingertips. Educate yourself, your children, and everyone around you. Unlike those idiots now in charge of running the country, we have facts and science on our side, provided we don't slip into fantasies of what could or should happen. Nobody can predict the future, and saying things like, well, if only this group or that group had done something different, we wouldn't have this situation, doesn't help. That may be true, but we don't have a time machine. We can't go back and fix things. We have to deal with the reality that is now. Let the others embrace fantasy. It will make our victory that much easier. There's a petition going around asking the members of the Electoral College to switch their vote to Hillary. That's a fantasy. They won't do it. And even if they did, Trump supporters aren't going to accept that result. The surest path to civil war in America is for the Electoral College to pick Hillary after Trump's been declared the winner. Remember, Rome fell because the people in power were fighting over who should be emperor, not because the barbarians overwhelmed them with superior numbers. The citizens of Rome could have defeated the barbarians, but decided that life under the barbarians was probably better than life under the crazies currently running the empire. The Dark Ages were the result of that. Yes, I know that Hillary won the popular vote and the Electoral College is an archaic throwback to the days of slavery in the U.S. Doesn't matter. It's the law of the land, and we have to deal with that fact. The Electoral College goes for Hillary at this point, and violence will erupt. 600,000 Americans died in our last civil war when we had a population of 31 million people. The population of the U.S. is 10 times that now, and large numbers of Americans are armed with small arsenals of weapons. Even if the same percentage of people die in a second civil war, that's some 6 million people. Or, to put it another way, almost the entire population of my state. In addition, the damage done will take decades to repair, and given the number of idiots I still see proudly waving Confederate flags, even a century and a half won't be enough to get people to realize shit was wrong. You want to talk about throwing out the Electoral College? I'm all ears, baby. It's an idea whose time has passed, but using it to pick Hillary now is a recipe for disaster. Even if full-scale civil war doesn't erupt, we'll see civil unrest on a far larger scale than we are now. And who knows what the fuck's going to happen on Inauguration Day. It isn't all bleak, however. Trump's cabinet appointments are rumored to be people like Sarah Palin, Ben Carson, and John Bolton. They're inept idiots who largely do not understand how government works. They'll certainly do some damage, but it is smaller than what it could be if they understood things. We know that he's looking at installing Giuliani, Gingrich, and others who do know what they're doing. But sometimes the best way to help someone fail is to give them exactly what they want. With both houses of Congress and the White House in Republican hands, they'll have little trouble enacting the policies that they want, and for the moment, they'll be more likely to be focused on things like economic policies and government regulation, not going after things like abortion and gay marriage. Those things will be attacked once the economic programs start to wreck the economy. But for now, they're likely to be on the back burner. It'll only be when things turn to shit that they'll aggressively go after vulnerable groups. That gives us some time to prepare. In the meantime, the one thing that all of us need to do is get involved somehow, someway, with politics at the local and state level. Presently, Democrats control 13 state legislatures. If they lose just one more, then they lose the ability to block any constitutional amendments that Republicans propose. That's our firewall. We lose that, and things like abortion and gay rights are gone for sure. We need to hold on to what we have and push to expand the number. It's not going to be easy, but nothing worth fighting for ever is. We can do it, however. I'm going to suggest again that folks get a copy of Eric Hoffer's The True Believer. I'll have an Amazon link in the show notes for the book. It is the best discussion of how someone like Trump could rise to power, and in knowing that, we know how to blunt his impact once he takes control. There's also a method of discussing issues with people that's called moral reframing. Essentially, it means that if you want to change someone's mind, you don't argue based on what convinces you, you try to find the things which will convince the other person. For example, if you're arguing with someone who is pro-law and order, don't make an argument based on compassion. Make one based on the law. If they're opposed to gay marriage, use things like equal protection under the law and the statement in the Declaration of Independence that all men are created equal to make your point, for example. You won't convince everyone, and sadly there's no magic switch that'll instantly convert people, but you can make a difference if you maintain calm. Don't let your anger control your actions, and trust science and reason to be your guide. Also, don't expect people to admit that they're wrong. Back most people into a corner, and they'll continue to fight you, even if they do know that they're wrong. There's even science to prove this. It's called the backfire effect. People are prepared for a frontal attack on their ideas. Come at them in a manner they expect, and their defenses will be up. Find another tack. Above all, don't be afraid to admit when you're wrong. It isn't in our nature to do so, but we can learn to do it. Don't let yourself get upset, no matter how heated the argument is. Walking away is nothing to be ashamed of. Sometimes it's the best move. Finally, to go all Godwin's law on the subject, I'm going to remind folks of two key moments in World War II history. The first is January 30th, 1933, which is when Hitler was sworn into power, thus ending the Weimar Republic. Essentially, he governed without opposition and launched the programs which led to the war and the brutal execution of over 6 million people in the death camps. The second is May 26, 1940. That's when the Dunkirk evacuation began. Against impossible odds, the British people, tens of thousands of ordinary men and women, took to the English Channel in a hodgepodge assortment of boats and rescued the Allied forces in France who were almost certain to be killed or captured by the German army. Without their heroic efforts, the D-Day invasion that led to the liberation of Europe never could have happened just 4 years later. What we do now determines which moment this will be seen as in history. If we lay down, do nothing, future generations will see this as the end of America. If we stand up, help those most in need to escape the coming danger, and fight back with everything we have, it'll be compared to Dunkirk. I don't know about you, but I'm pulling for Dunkirk. Most importantly, don't be silent in this time. Even a small voice of support can help someone. I once heard an interview with Kenneth Baldwin, one of the few people to survive a suicide attempt off the Golden Gate Bridge. He says that now, whenever he drives over a bridge and sees someone standing by a railing, he always honks, smiles, and waves at them. He does this because had someone done that simple gesture for him, he never would have jumped that day. He doesn't know if he saved any lives by doing this, but at least he's made an effort. Any of you listening to this want to know how to start your own podcast, because the more voices we have raised up in this time, the harder it's going to be for Trump to get his way. It's insanely easy and relatively cheap to do. If you can use a word processor, you can do a podcast. Let me know, and I'll be happy to help. All the software you need is free, and depending upon who your hosting service is, the cost can be as low as a few bucks a month. Remember, the last thing to come out of Pandora's box was hope. We humans, like all animals, are wired for survival. But unlike other animals, we're capable of using reason and science to enhance it. We lost this round, and we might lose the next. But ultimately, if we trust science and reason while not blinding ourselves to the reality around us, we will win. The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. How long it takes for us to win this fight depends entirely upon us and how many allies we're able to gather together. Treat people with respect, promote science, reason, equality for all, and protect the weakest among us. And never give up hope.
That's it for another episode of the Atheist in the Trailer Park Podcast. You can subscribe to the show on iTunes. It's also available on Stitcher. Follow the show on Twitter at tparkatheist and on Facebook at facebook.com/trailerparkatheist. Email Tucker at trailerparkatheist@gmail.com. Show notes can be found at tparkatheist.blogspot.com. Thanks for listening.
Say goodnight, Fuzz-Nuts.
All I know is this violates every canon of respectable broadcasting.
Damned cat.